Hi everyone, Kate Berkner here today with Dr. Tom Phelan, the author and creator of 123 Magic, as well as the author of the Manager Mom Epidemic. Dr. Phelan, welcome.
Good morning, Kay. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So typically what we do is we'll pick a topic and Dr. Phelan will sort of dive a little bit into that topic, and he often will do a seminar on that in the following weeks. Today, one of the things we wanted to do is kind of hearkening back to the Facebook Lives of old that we used to do and answering some common parenting questions. So Dr. Phelan and I were chatting just before this and really noticing there are some questions that come up over and over again from parents who either are starting the program or who have been doing the program for a while. And we've seen some of those recently and wanted to go ahead and address them here because we suspect that a lot of people who use the 123 Magic program might have similar questions. So Dr. Phelan, first question comes from a parent. Her son recently turned 3. He's always been a good sleeper, normally loves bedtime, and recently he's been essentially throwing a tantrum at bedtime. Not when it comes to going to bed, but when it comes to mom or dad leaving the room. So they do have an established bedtime routine, and it ends with books and songs. And normally when books and songs are over, they can leave. But recently he has started insisting that mom or dad lay down with him after books and songs are done, and even screaming when they leave the room. This is complicated by the fact that they also have a younger child that they're trying not to wake up. So they don't really want their 3-year-old screaming. So could you tell us sort of what has gone wrong or what has changed here? Why did this previously good bedtime child suddenly start fighting bedtime, and what can mom and dad do about it?
Okay. Well, first of all, this is nothing unusual, and it happens quite often. And I'm going to have to guess a little bit, but to what might be causing this. But it doesn't make any difference if I'm right or wrong in terms of how you handle it. But what I'm going to guess is that this child is getting old enough to start having some nighttime or bedtime fears, and that what's being manifested is some kind of separation anxiety. So that when mom and dad leave the room, because that's the time that the child, blows up. Very common. But some kids, they get to be a certain age and they will start having fears. There's a monster in the closet. There's something climbing up the wall outside. All kinds of stuff. And they'll say, "I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I have to go pee," or they'll throw a temper tantrum when you try and leave. So what you need is a routine for the tantrum. A lot of parents have told me, "We have a great bedtime routine. Why isn't this working?" And it's not working because you don't have a routine for the tantrum. You got a routine for everything up to then. So the first thing you want to do is you want to expect that this is going to happen. And then what you do, and I would put on a floor fan too, if you're not already doing a floor fan. I'm a big fan of fans, so to speak, and I think they can have a very calming effect at bedtime. So you put on a floor fan, and then you tell the child what we're going to do when we leave the room is we're not going to leave the room for a while. We're going to sit in the doorway until you go to sleep. Okay, and that's what you do. And you can imagine if you're a parent, this is no fun. What do you want to do? You want to get them in bed, get out, go watch TV, read, have a snack, whatever you want to do. Well, sorry, you can't do that for a while. And if there's 2 parents, you can, switch places. But it's called cut them off at the pass. And so you put them in bed, you kiss them goodnight, and then you sit in a chair with your back to them in the doorway or somewhere like that. And you do that until they go to sleep. Now, some kids will tantrum when you do that. And actually, my son used to do this when he was 18 months old. He'd get out of bed, I'd put him back, he'd get out of bed, I'd put him back. And what you do is after bedtime, you cannot talk to them and they cannot leave the room. And that's it. So they get up, you put them back, they get up, you put them back. If you do that 3 or 4 times, they can sleep on the floor. My son used to sleep on the floor. I'd cover him up or I'd try and pick him up and not wake him up and get him back to bed. But it's called cut them off at the pass. And what will happen is your presence will reassure the child so that separation anxiety doesn't kick in, or it doesn't kick in so much. And also you're blocking the door, but you're still there. It's not a pleasant thing to go through, and you may have to do several weeks of it, but it beats it beats the alternative. And when you say, there's another child, in the house, this often happens, or you have neighbors that are close or something like that, and they can hear the screaming. You're going to have to see what happens. But if you get flustered and don't know what you're going to do when that child tantrums, the tantrums are going to get worse. So it's calm, decisive. I'm here. You can't leave the room, but you don't repeat all this, and you don't talk to them when they start screaming. So it's aggravating. But the main thing is to know what you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a terrific solution for kids who maybe are scared or are kind of getting upset. I'm going to elaborate on this from a personal point of view.
Okay.
My 3-year-old will go into his room, but he talks to himself for probably 2.5 hours
Oh my God.
after bedtime. He will play with toys in his room. He'll bang stuff into the walls. He tries to sneak out of the room. So none of it is about being upset, and none of it is about being scared. But it's almost like a playful, mischievous, curious sort of thing. Would you handle a child who um, they're not scared, they're not angry, they're just sort of having fun? Can you handle them in the same way with that same cut them off at the pass routine?
You could, if you think about it, I think you don't know exactly what's going on. 2.5 hours for a 3-year-old is a big chunk of change. And that means if they're not sleeping for that period of time, are they making it up? And the first question would be, how many hours of sleep is a child getting a night? Because they need a lot of sleep. The second thing is you don't know that they're not scared because the anxiety might be enough just to keep them awake. And and so they're going to fiddle around, do this, that, and the other thing. So it may not be enough to make them tantrum, but I think I would try the cut them off at the pass. Sitting in the door, your back to them, and see if it makes any difference. And what we'd be doing by doing that is testing the hypothesis that it is anxiety, but a low-grade anxiety, not enough to cause a tantrum, but enough to keep them awake. 2.5 hours is a long time, and
It's
you want to
really
sleep in during that time.
yeah, absolutely.
Do
Okay, great.
you have a floor fan?
We he has a like a white noise machine,
Okay.
which I know is very like it's a very popular baby shower gift now. It's a, like it makes different noises, and sometimes he will play with the noises because he can push the different buttons on it and pick. It'll make like ocean and general white noise and heartbeat noises and lullabies and things like that. So
No, is he playing with it during the 2.5 hours?
occasionally, not too often.
I'd vote for a floor fan because the ocean waves, for example, are intermittent. You want a constant
Hmm.
sound, at least is my vote.
Got it. So that's an interesting point that floor fan is potentially superior to the white noise machines that are so very popular.
Yeah, they're good too, but they also have a setting that's like a fan,
Hmm.
or, babbling brook or whatever. But you want a constant noise.
Got it. Okay, terrific. All right. So next question comes from a parent who is wondering how to tell when a child is developmentally old enough that you can use 1, 2, 3 magic with them. So this particular parent, their child is about 2. She says that the child was kind of a late talker, and so she's wondering, how do you know when your child is ready that you can start using 1, 2, 3 magic with them effectively?
Okay. Well, our general rule over the years has been that if you have a typically developing youngster, you can start at 18 months. And now, what parents often say was they can hardly talk at 18 months. And the response to that is that children's receptive language precedes their expressive language. And that means they can understand what you're saying way before they can speak and make sense. So it doesn't make any difference if they can talk or not. 1, 2, 3 magic is a very simple cueing system. And so generally 18-month-old, even if they only have a few words, can usually understand. Now it may take them a week or two to get the hang of it, but you can usually use it. But if you have a child who's 5 and they have a mental age of 2, you could start. But if you don't think they have the mental age of 2, but most typically developing youngsters, no problem.
Got it. Okay, great. Um, okay, so now I've got 2 questions that are around sort of the counting and the rest period itself. The first question is from a parent who they've been doing the program for a few weeks and it was going well, but now the child has started fighting the counting, right? So when mom starts counting, he'll start yelling, he'll start screaming, saying really disrespectful things to mom. I hate you, go away, stop talking to me, things like that. And mom is really struggling with sort of what to do with this behavior. And it sounds like maybe she's feeling kind of offended because it's so disrespectful. She doesn't want to allow the child to continue being disrespectful. So that for her is sort of complicating the issue of both A, the initial thing that the child is being counted for, and then B, this additional disrespectful behavior. How should a parent handle a situation like that where you've almost got two things that can be counted?
Yeah. Well, you do have two things that are going to be counted. So if you're counting the first thing for badgering you for candy before dinner or something like that, and you say that's one, and the kid says, I hate your guts, you stink. Okay. What are you going to do? Well, that's two. That's a misbehavior, and it's counted in chapter 10, which is testing and manipulation. That is an example of testing and manipulation, and so it's number two, which is temper. And so when the child does that, it's just accountable behavior. So that child find themselves on a two. Now, with the way things are going with this kid right now, they'll be on a three very quickly. This is going to be over real fast because you're going to say, I hate you, you stink. That's two, and then boom, you're going to get a bigger tantrum, and it's three, and then we're into the rest period timeout or whatever. The other thing, so the first thing to do is keep your presence in mind. You when you're doing counting, you can count one for whining, you can count two for teasing the dog, you can count three. You don't have to have separate counts for different kind of misbehavior. The other thing you can do with the child is you can rehearse counting at a time when nothing is going on. And so you say, you've been having some trouble. When I count you, you're blowing up. Let's practice this a little bit. Pretend you're doing something. What do you want to do? Do you want to whine at me or whatever? And so then they whine at you and you say, that's what. Oh, good. Look at you. Didn't blow up. You didn't have a tantrum and all that. And you rehearse it a few times and see how that goes. But the main thing is to have in your mind, what's going on. The disrespect, if it's really, fairly violent like that, is accountable behavior. It's a misbehavior. And so we're simply going to count it. It's nothing different.
Yeah. And I think something that you said about the tantrum at bedtime earlier, I think kind of applies here is if this has been happening, sort of expect and mentally prepare yourself that it might happen again. And then you as a parent are not kind of taken emotionally unawares by this sudden disrespect that you're getting from the child.
Exactly. It's a good point. Predict it and then you're ready for it.
Yeah. So then one thing that we've talked about in the past is sort of there are kind of these I'm a kid and I'm mad behaviors that we may choose not to count. So for instance, if the kid says, I want a piece of candy, no dinners in 5 minutes. Come on, come on, come on. That's one. I hate you. You stink. You're the worst. That's two. If the child then goes, ugh, and stomps away,
Yes.
but stops what they're doing, at that point, should the parent count them? Because the which is clearly an expression of frustration, could
Yeah.
be considered disrespectful. Or should they stop counting because the child has simply expressed their frustration, but they've stopped the behavior and walked away from the situation? What would you recommend there?
I'll tell you what I think is going on first. If you looked at all the families that are doing counting in the United States right now, half of them would count that and half of them would not count it. And I think I agree with where I think you're going with this or where you feel I would not count it because I think if the child's behavior is that they are leaving the situation and ending it. And and that's it. And so I'm not going to count them. If it's just if it's another violent disrespect, like I wish you were dead or something like that, then you'd hit them with a three. But otherwise, no. But there are two types of parents. There are some parents who just can't tolerate that kind of thing from their kids, even if it's a groan or a moan or whatever. There are other parents that can. They think, and if the child's walking away, like you were saying, that's good. They're learning frustration tolerance. They learned that the counting is for real, and the incident is over. Leave them be. They're entitled to their frustration.
Okay, great. So then the other sort of counting rest period behavioral question, and I've seen this in a number of different ways from a number of different parents lately, is with a child who is screaming, crying, yelling once they've been put into the rest period and continues to do so for quite some time, right? So in the book, I know with rest period, we outline, and this is something that we say in our house, rest period doesn't start until you're quiet, right? So the kid can be yelling, but that 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is based on the child's age, doesn't start until the child is quiet. The concern I've seen expressed a couple of times is my 3-year-old will yell for 30 minutes, or my 6-year-old will yell for 30 minutes while in that rest period. So the question that the parents are asking is, do you really leave them in a rest period for 30 minutes plus 5? Or is there something else that you can or should be doing with them? I think there's probably some parental guilt coming in here around leaving a child alone for that long.
Yeah. Well, there's several things you can do. I mean, if you want to, you can sit on the other side of the door, or you put a gate up and sit on the other side of the door. But we have in the book, we have an age cutoff here, and the age cutoff is 4. And the rule is if the child is over 4, then we do what you just said. They stay in there until they're done with the tantrum. And if you have a kid you think has separation anxiety or history of separation anxiety, then we're not going to shut the door, and we may stay there. But if some kids will stay in there and they'll just scream and yell and roll around and all that, and you don't have to be there, and they're okay with that. If the child is under 4, we're going to let them out after just a short period of time. And this gets a little tricky because you have 2 and 3-year-old. They don't understand that you have to stay in here until you're done. So that's one of the reasons we have the cutoff of 4. But if they're younger than that, you go to the room and you say, time's up, and you turn around and walk away. Now, one or two things are going to happen. They may stay in the room and just, they may keep yelling or whatever, or they may stay in the room and be quiet and not come out. That's fine. You leave them alone. You don't go in there and say, time's up now. You're going to be good. You're going to stop doing, all that kind of stuff is provocative. Some kids will come out of the room following you. That's okay. Some kids will come out of the room following you and screaming. That's not okay. That's going to get counted again, and they're going to go right back. And so the tricky thing is when you let them out, if they're 2 or 3, you're worried. And so you have a tendency to talk, and the talking provokes the child into the same kind of behavior that got them there in the first place. So we don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings up a good point with the parent being worried. One thing that I've sort of generally heard some people express is like, I'm worried that putting my kid into a rest period in their room is going to cause them separation anxiety. It's going to make them feel like I've abandoned them. And the obviously the point of the rest period is not, it's not a punishment, right? It's not to be cruel. It's to give the child and to give you some time to cool down, right? And to sort of think about what that behavior was. So what would you say to the parent who is concerned that putting a child in their room, whether the child, and usually I see this question asked around younger kids, like, oh, my 2 and 3-year-old may not understand fully what's going on here. Are they going to feel abandoned if I put them into a rest period in their room? What would you advise parents?
I would say here there are 2 things. Number 1, kids in general are very resilient. And like you said, this is not a horrible punishment. It is a consequence. So in a way, it is a punishment. It's also a cooling off period for both people, for the parent and for the kid. Some kids are going to get separation anxiety anyway. It's a fairly common thing in children. So if the parent just relax, put them there. If you're worried about the separation anxiety, don't do the time in concept where you sit them on your lap or talk to them during timeout. Don't talk to them during the timeout. But if you're worried about that, you can sit there on the other side of the door while they're there, and they know you're there, and they're reassured, and so on. But I think it's a little too much worrying, as I think you may be implying, on the part of the parents, that this is going to do something bad. What'll do something bad to them, which does happen, is that if you're using a timeout system, but you yell at them, or you shake them, or you spank them, and then you put them in a rest period or timeout, now we can cause some problems, and that's not what we're talking about.
Got it. So, as far for the parents who are worried, if you are sort of following the program and doing kind of holding up your part, which is calm, not getting emotional or upset or angry when you're doing the counting, sending the child to the rest period. And then if you're still concerned then that your child, has shown separation anxiety or might experience separation anxiety, Dr. Phelan, I like what you said about the baby gate, the chair in the doorway, any of that sort of thing where it's clear to the child that they have to stay there. The baby gate sort of helps enforce the staying in the room thing, but they can still see the parent. They know that they haven't been abandoned, but that instead this is just a different kind of time.
Yeah, that's a good summary of it.
All right, fantastic.